5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hello and welcome back to Tennis Unfiltered with me, James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the iNewspaper. I'm fairly sure my fiance thought I was saying hello to her there, but no, she just got in the door and her dinner is waiting for her. I've got George Bellshaw and Calvin Betton with me today, as always, going through everything that's been going on in tennis over the last 7 days and a lot more. And we'll start off by answering loads of your questions. We love it when people get in touch with questions. You can do so in lots of different ways. The best way, I think, is email, because I'm old-fashioned, tennisunfiltered.com. But we're on Twitter at unfiltertennis as well. We're on Instagram too, although I have to say I've yet to really power up the Tennis Unfiltered Instagram. So if you really want to get hold of us, then email and Twitter is the way I would suggest. You can also leave us a review. I've got a deal with you, the listener, that if you leave a 5-star review, I will read it out. Sometimes that means that you can sneak in little digs or messages or feedback, as some people call it. On this occasion, Mike R945, who's over in the States, says, love the pod. Really enjoy listening to all the banter back and forth and their take on tennis. Only wish they would invest in some top quality mics. Sound like they all share one mic and it's in another room. Well, Mike, I can assure you we don't share mics because we're very rarely in the same room. I think it's happened about once in our entire history, and we all got COVID as a result. I can assure you that over the off season we are going to have a little break over Christmas and some sort of news coming on exactly what that'll look like in the next couple of weeks. But yes, it is definitely on our Christmas list, and hopefully Santa will be kind with the old company credit cards. So fingers crossed for some improved audio setups. But yeah, please do leave us a review like that. Calvin, you're UK sort of bound at the moment, are you? Unusual to see you back at home with the world's largest CD collection.
I got back from Munich on Thursday or Friday, I can't remember. And then I don't know if my travelling's done for the year now with tennis.
You've got pre-season at the NTC, Calvin. I mean, if that's not glamorous, I don't know what is.
I mean, out of this country, you know. It's like, I might do one more trip with Luke, 1 or 2 more trips with Luke, but I don't think we've got anything in the diary. I think Henry's done after this week, probably, unless he decides to play a challenger. So, and I couldn't go with him to Sofia because I had a prior appointment that I had booked in.
How long? I mean, you know, we often talk on this pod about how players don't take long enough pre-season in the top 10, the top 15. Someone like Henry, I mean, how long is his off-season going to be? How much time off will he actually take?
He's going to take a bit of a longer one this year, because last year he basically had none. Last year he played until the very last week that you can possibly play to get into Australia. And I think that gave him a week, maybe not even a full week before pre-season started, which we would normally start 2 weeks before Christmas, because players will generally go away either Boxing Day or the day after that to head off to Australia and that kind of thing. But I think this year Henry's going to take a longer one because his girlfriend lives in America. So I think he's going to take a few weeks out there before pre-season. But also he's in a position where there's no real need for him to play anymore in the tournaments that are left after this week. They won't affect his ranking really at all. Even if he wins them or if he doesn't play, his ranking pretty much stays the same, because I think there's just three challengers left, I think. So that's kind of where he's at. But like I say, he may feel like he needs 1 more week, but I think his plan is that he's going to finish after this week for the season, and then, like I say, head to the States for about a month. He'll probably train for a couple of weeks when he's in the States.
George, what about you? You're obviously someone who takes your off-season very seriously, in some ways more seriously than your on-season, I would suggest. How much of a break are you planning from the hardcore physical exercise?
Well, I've got 2.5 weeks in Thailand coming up pretty soon.
Wow.
Don't know if that's my on-season or my off-season. I can't really decide.
I mean, knowing your lifestyle, George, that's very much your peak season.
I've just remembered that a mate of mine, when he went to Thailand about 4 years ago, he sent, without a doubt, the best text message that anyone's ever had. And I'll send it into the group. after this voice note, but after this podcast, and maybe something we could use as a Patreon. But if anybody liked my Guinness story, this is 50 times better than that one. And it's not a Thailand like debacle like you'd imagine a standard Thailand debacle. It involves a fish market and a bus.
Sounds like the title of a sort of weird memoirs. The holiday, the fish market, and the bus. Well, George, we look forward to you going to Thailand, although we will miss you because I assume it's going to be pretty difficult to pot around there. But we'll soldier on in your absence. I'm sure we'll find someone to fill the gap while you're away. Who knows? But yeah, we will miss you, I'm sure. And just make sure you come back, I reckon. My mate whose wedding I went to recently went to Thailand as part of his travelling, fell off a scooter on his second day, like lost most of the skin on his leg, didn't have proper medical insurance. It was a whole thing, and it basically completely ruined his holiday. So don't get on a scooter, I reckon.
I'll do my best. I remember I actually went out there. Really going to start showing my age now, but like 13 years ago.
Wow.
And I did get on the back of a scooter with someone at like 4 a.m, and then there was suddenly like a monsoon, and that was like a really surreal, slightly hammered moment where I was like, this is very dangerous. What am I doing?
If you ever see a sort of lanky ginger tennis fan wandering around at 4 a.m, avoid him. He is a like fly paper for dickheads, George Bellshaw, on a night out. Something always seems to go wrong. But anyway. Right, let's move on before we reveal far too much about George's previous career as a full-time piss artist. And on to your questions. As I say, we love it when we get them, and they're always interesting, and it always gets us thinking and talking. So Andy has been in touch on email. He says, enjoyed the debate around Masters 1000 events last week. So what I'd like to know from you all is an order for which they are the best to worst events and why. Plus which ones, I know you mentioned Paris last week, should be dropped, and for where, e.g. a promotion of a 500. My order of favourites with surfaces, viewing times, etc. are, and I assume this is from favourite to worst, yeah, must be, Rome, Miami, Monte Carlo, Indian Wells, Cincinnati, Madrid, Canada, Paris, Shanghai. We maybe won't rank them all, but George, maybe I could trouble you for your sort of your favourite and your least favourite, and what would you promote in place of the relegated one?
I mean, the favourite one I've been to. Well, I mean, I love the view in Monte Carlo. That was just like a beautiful view. But I like Madrid as a tournament. That's one of the ones I did the most of any kind of the foreign ones. I used to just quite enjoy going to that one. I think it's just a good city to host tennis matches, even if it's not necessarily the prettiest. But I find it quite an interesting tournament with the kind of altitude and the clay thrown in. I think it's like slightly quite different to a lot of other tournaments on the tour. So I quite like Madrid. I mean, I'm always joking about dropping Indian Wells, but it's more I dislike the swing into America from kind of Australia and Asia. So I think that would be my big change to Masters 1000s. But in terms of tournament itself, yeah, I think Paris is a little bit of a non-event sometimes, and also I think the scheduling there's always pretty crap. So that's probably the worst one, I think. 500, I think probably a pretty obvious answer, but I think it'd be nice to have a grass court Masters. So, and being very biased, I would prefer that to be Queen's than Halle, even though you probably should say a German Masters would be better. I would prefer a British Masters. So yeah,
unbelievable, classic post-imperial mindset. That, George, congratulations. Calvin, your favourite Masters?
Ooh, I've not been to any, so I don't think I haven't got a favourite that I've been to. I think Monte Carlo is a good one. Like it just feels like it has a bit of character that some of the others don't. The players love Indian Wells. Like we always have this debate on the WhatsApp group that George keeps banging on about ditching Indian Wells, and there's absolutely zero chance of it. So the players absolutely love it. I think the one that's disappointed me is Miami, because I think they've really messed that up. Like with the change of venue and taking it away from a real tennis hub where people liked to go and watch tennis and that kind of thing, and put it in basically in the middle of nowhere, that takes ages for anyone to get to, and taken the whole atmosphere out of the stadium and what have you. I think if I was going to change one, if I was going to change one, it'd either be that one, and I'd put one in South America, either Mexico or Brazil. I think would be good, because I think you could swing that Indian Wells to maybe Rio or somewhere like that, and have one there, or even in Mexico. The whole China swing is a mess. Just how it's arranged. Like, we've got this business of like tournaments starting in midweek and ending in midweek. There's a 250, but then there's a week where there's nothing, and then there's a Masters. And I know from scheduling point of view with Henry this year that it was just a total mess. Like, you can't plan to get there. You can't really justify going there unless you're one of the top, unless you're definitely in all of the tournaments. You can't justify going, because you might end up only getting in one. So it wouldn't bother me if the Shanghai Masters didn't happen, but I don't think it will ever not happen, because, again, money talks, doesn't it? So, and again, like George says, Paris is a bit of a non-entity, but I don't think they'll ever get rid of it, because I think there's a lot of money behind it, and the players like being in Europe at this time of year, and especially with the year-end finals coming up in a week's time, you'd struggle to get one anywhere else. And you could say Germany should have one. It's a huge tennis market, but even somewhere like Scandinavia, I think I experienced in Scandinavia last week that tennis is a huge sport up there still, even though they might not have players at the very, very top end. I know that Luke's at a tournament in Helsinki this week, that is a centre with 24 indoor courts.
Wow,
which is that's a tennis place. If you're willing to, if you're able to sustain 24 indoor courts, there's a lot of tennis market up in Scandinavia, I think.
Absolutely. I've sort of wavered on Paris this week. I know I last week I was like, Paris and Masters is a nonsense, and I do think it's a nonsense to have another event in the same city, albeit Paris is a very big city. And a big tennis market, France is, and it is at the other end of town. I read Mike Dixon's column in the Mail this week, which always involves the last couple of paragraphs about whatever his favourite bar is, which I always like hearing about. And it's kind of more at the sort of Marais end of Paris, for people who know it, near the kind of Spanish Quarter, and it is much more like I don't know. It's a much nicer, it's a much more cooler part of town. But nevertheless, I don't think Paris necessarily should have one. Because it doesn't need it. Yeah, South America. I think the Rio 500. What's actually going to happen is Saudi Arabia is probably going to end up having one in that part of the swing. But I think the Rio 500 getting tuned up to 1,000. South America is massive tennis market. It's had some great players over the years. I mean, you only have to look at where where Rafa Nadal went on exhibition tour to make a load of money, and where I'm sure Roger Federer's played a couple down there. Like, they know, like that's real free market forces there. They know where the big money is and where the underserved tennis market is. So yeah, I'd get one down there ASAP. Or Mexico. I know it hasn't covered itself in glory as a tennis hosting nation this week, but maybe things would go a little bit better if they had a better go. Because I mean, is it Acapulco, the one where Kyrgios famously beat Djokovic? Is that right? And
Nadal, wasn't it?
Nadal, even. Yeah, okay. That makes more sense. And that always seems to go down well. They get good crowds in there when it's not too hot. I think that's the thing for me is there's this kind of, if you build it, they will come attitude in tennis sometimes. And it's not true. Like, Field of Dreams is a film. And I think that there is an element of, yes, we've got to grow the game. I don't know the best way to do that, but I don't think Masters 1000 events are the way to grow the game. I think that's, you're taking one of the kind of showpiece events outside the slams and you're taking a big punt on it. I actually think you should be going to places where there's a big established tennis audience, and you can maybe sort of use that as a germination in some parts of the world where neighbouring countries don't have the same kind of thing. And Germany, of course, I mean, yeah, obviously Hamburg used to have one, but Germany doesn't, so that would seem like an obvious one. I hope that's answered your question, Andy. Probably no surprises there for people who've been listening long enough to know our hearts well enough. But there you go. Right, Tom on email is also talking about Masters 1000. He said, how much do you think the ending of best of 5 Masters 1000 finals helped the big three win as many majors as they have? I'm sure they would have still broken records, but there were so many players who could beat them over best of 3, but not over best of 5. Do you think the players like Dimitrov or Ferrer would have had more of a chance over best of 5 had they had that exposure in M1000 finals rather than solely majors? I genuinely think that is a big 3 number of majors question I've never heard before. So congrats, Tom. GG. Calvin, what do you think? I mean, you're old enough to remember best of 5 Masters finals, so maybe you're the expert here.
I am, yeah. They didn't all used to have best of 5. Just some of them did. I know Miami used to.
Was that the famous Federer Nadal Miami? Is that right?
Yeah, maybe. And some of the others did. I used to quite like it when they did because I thought it gave the 500s a little bit of. It gave the Masters, or they used to call them the Super 9, I think, back then. It gave them a little bit of something different from the normal 500s. So I quite liked it when they did, but as with anything, the players would vote against it if it meant they had to play less. And I think you've lost a little bit of it since then. Like you've just mentioned there, one there, James, the famous Nadal Federer one. And you wouldn't have been saying that if it was a best of 3. It would just be another Nadal Federer match that they've probably played quite a few times since then on best of 3, and we don't really remember any of those, do we? So yeah, I don't know if it affected anything because I don't think it's a case of getting practice playing best of 5. I think the thing with best of 5 is the better player will usually, the longer any contest goes on, the better player will usually win it. Like, the example I'd always use on that is if I was to play Roger Federer, or if I was to play Novak Djokovic now at best of 5 sets tennis, I'd have absolutely zero chance of beating him. Whereas if I was to play him for 1 point,
okay,
I'd probably
I was like,
have,
how short are we going to make this match to give you a chance?
But it's like, there's a likely, if you said like, what chance would you give me of winning 1 point against the Novak Djokovic? It's not big by any stretch, but it's better than over 5 hours of tennis.
Yeah, absolutely.
George, I love you think you'd take him 5 hours, Calvin. 45 minutes. There's
a hell of a lot of toilet. There's a hell of a lot of toilet breaks.
I could do some shit housing. Don't make any mistake about
that. George, I mean, we often talk about this kind of the hoodoo and the difficulty of best of 5 against those guys. Do you think it's true that the fact that some of those people played less best of 5 tennis against the big 3 made it harder?
I can't say I'm overly convinced by the argument. I think, guys like Dimitrov and Ferrer, who was quoted there, have played a lot of best of 5 set matches over the years. They've had matches against the big 3 over best of 5 and not won any, probably. I'm not really sure that would have been the big deciding factor. I mean, I take Calvin's point. I think there's probably something, and particularly if we're moving into the age of a 2-week Masters, where there's potentially a bit more time with the calendar for that kind of recovery, it would make these finals stand out a little bit if those were to kind of come back in. And he's right. I mean, what's the most memorable best of 3 sets Masters final you guys can think of? I mean, they just don't jump to mind so much, and it's not because they've been bad matches necessarily. It's just the best 3 set match I remember last season was that Djokovic Alcaraz one, which was a fantastic final, but that was 4 hours. That was a bit of an outlier of really high quality kind of best of 3 final that we'll probably remember for a long time comparatively, but they're quite few and far between really, because you can have matches that just go horribly one way or another. Like I remember Djokovic pasting Nadal somewhere once in maybe Doha or something, like 11-1. Like that almost sticks out more than an epic 3-setter, because the epics we remember are more often than not for the best players in the world at Grand Slams where it's best of 5 sets, and it feels like it really matters and brings out the best in them, I'd say.
I think it's kind of pie in the sky because we won't ever go back to best of 5. It'll go the opposite way. I'm pretty sure that in the next 10 years, a lot of these tournaments will end up having super tie breaks instead of third sets. And I'm not saying that's something I would like. I wouldn't like it. I don't like super tie breaks. But you can see that's where it's going. I think it's just the players will vote it in because the players ultimately and their teams around them, they like playing less tennis. And that's what they'll end up That's what they'll end up getting their own way on it.
Who's the sort of player or caliber of player that change would benefit most? Like, do you think that would see a lot more kind of big shocks early, or would it kind of dial someone like Novak in just even more because he's
it's another tiebreak for Djokovic. Exactly.
I think it's more that I don't think it'll ever happen at the Slams.
No,
and I think it maybe won't happen at the Masters. And I think from that point of view, the guys at the top, without sounding crude about it, they don't really give a shit about the others. So they think we'll earn the same amount of money. And even if it will reduce, that again, anytime you reduce the length of something, it makes the field, it evens the field out. So you will get more shocks in that kind of thing. But I think the guys at the top just won't overly care too much. They'll think, Djokovic doesn't care about winning 500s or 250s anymore. I'm not sure anyone in the top 10 does.
Well, you say that, but the man he's got his eyes on Jimmy Connor's record now, and Federer suddenly became a lot more interested in them towards the back end of his career.
He's still going to win them, but he's going to think he's not so much so that going, right, I'm the best player in the world. I'm not going to risk that by having this shorter format that gives other players a bigger chance. I think that will be outweighed by him thinking, I could earn a fortune here and play less tennis. And that's the way that the players always think. And that I might sound a bit grim talking about it, but it's kind of the same way as the Saudi Arabia thing. They'll think, we don't really care about the spectacle. How can we earn more money?
Yeah, it's the same with the golf, right? Like the big party line that they were all told. Well, I don't know if they're told. I think probably were told, or at least that became the popular line was, I want to spend more time with my family and with my friends, and playing less golf and making more money is also the way to do that. Yeah, I think probably true. George, have you got any notes of optimism among that? Because I've got Saudi Arabia written down in the running order later on. I'd really rather not it all be doom and gloom.
No, not many notes of optimism. It'd be interesting if they did take Miami from a scheduling perspective, and not to bang on about it one more time, but it is even harder to justify just a random jump to America for 1 2-week tournament at that stage of the season. And I don't know. I think in the grand scheme of trying to make things more carbon neutral, they can have all the players offsetting things in the world, but to lob everyone over for 2 weeks and then off to kind of Saudi Arabia, I think it's not a great look. So,
George, for the record, when the Tennis Unfiltered gets his big break and we start sending people to tournaments, the first one I'm sending you to is Indian Wells. Absolutely no question in my mind.
I'd be very interested to go there. I've genuinely got nothing. I've got nothing against the tournament as a whole. It's just, I don't like the swing there. I don't think it adds much, and it's hard to move Indian Wells to a time that it would be better.
You can go and glue yourself to the gates to stop them from holding the tournament.
Yeah, that'd be quite a deserty gates, I think. I'm not sure I'd enjoy that.
On that though, George, because it's not just those 2 tournaments. There is the one before it. Is it Delray before it? When I was there last year, or a couple of weeks before it, and so on that basis, then what is a bigger swing than that? Because Australia's only a 4-week swing. Like, there's only the 2 European ones. There's only the European clay into the grass that's longer than that, and then the big American one. Everything else is always a 3 or 4 week swing.
Yeah, I mean, I'd prefer them to do the swing in a different continent, though. To be honest, if I was going to mix it up.
Well, I know which continent we don't want it on, and that's coming up later.
Well, that's probably where we'll end up.
Seems inevitable. Right, let's move on to the last question I've got. There is one more that I need to pick up off Twitter, but we'll maybe use that a bit later on. Philip asks, is there such a thing as a tennis coach consultant? Someone who has a database of all elite coaches and knows their approach, their fees, their training personality, and advises professionals on which coaches would match what they're looking for. Rather than Rune accepting Boris's cold call, would he not be better to tell Betton consultants what is going on with his game and training, and then get advice on which coaches best meet his needs? Well, I'll tell you, I mean, Calvin, I'll let you jump in because Philip is clearly asking you. But certainly in my experience and having spoken to people, this is something that your agent does an awful lot of. And Max Eisenberg talked about it in his interview with the Tennis Podcast a few months ago, how, players would say, find me a coach, and invariably he would give them one or two names. Like I don't know, Calvin. I mean, it's such a sort of, to me, it seems a bit like the kind of dating world pre-online dating. Finding a coach is sort of like meeting people at things and kind of knowing someone and be like, oh, do you think they like me? Do you think we'll work well together? Like, it does seem a bit less formalized than most other areas of life.
Yeah, it's massively that way, I think. And I've thought for a long while that it's amazed me that there's no kind of, as much as I hate recruitment people, I find them some of the worst people in the world. I hope none of them are listening. But it amazes me that there is kind of no recruitment firm for high-end tennis coaches or elite-level tennis coaches that would put you in those kind of positions. You'd think there's enough of those jobs around. For example, there's probably, depending on how low down you'd go, but if say anyone inside the top 300 wanted a coach, you've got 600 players right there in men's and women, 600 companies per se right there. And the coaches at the top end are paid well, so there's enough coming from it financially. But there is nothing like that. There isn't really even a website. I found out last week, and I didn't even really know about this, but Luke told me that the players get an ATP email where you can register, a coach can register that they're available for weeks, and some players can pick them up. But it's just basically like a message board. So going, this coach is available for this week. If anybody wants, I don't know if anybody ever takes them up on it on that kind of thing. But yeah, I've always thought that there should be something like some form of recruitment business that does that kind of thing. The agent stuff is not the same because they don't know anything. The agents, they don't know who the good coaches are. It's just, again, it's people who they know. It's not based on anything objective. It's based on people who they know, who they've got history with, who sometimes are signed up to the same agency because they're doing a bit of work for them and that kind of thing, and with some other players. So it's never, like, as much as Max Eisenberg talks about how he knows, I've been through this before, he talks about how he knows who the best tennis coaches are. I don't think he does at all, to be honest. But, and tying in something else similar to that, I remember a couple of years ago, Andy Murray talked about, which I found interesting, this idea of having like the equivalent of a director of football, or players having a director of football, who would oversee their tennis, and then they would find them a coach, like a sort of director of tennis, if you will, or a manager who would then manage their overall team, and they would go and find who they thought were the coaches were. And you could have sort of someone in expertise who's, again, well connected and knows the field in that kind of thing. But no, it's very archaic how it works, where it's just basically, I mean, a lot of it gets done in players' areas, and coaches going and pushing themselves on players, going, I think I could help you here. And you see it all the time. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I don't like Wimbledon. It's like a lot of the coaches, who I don't rate, I think are not very pleasant people either. They tend to use it as a networking opportunity, and it's not my scene. I don't do that at all. I don't go and speak to any of the players professionally who I don't already coach. But that's not how some of them operate, particularly on the women's tour.
I thought it was interesting. I'd never come across it before, but I recently started using a new results app called Resultina, which I got flagged by, I think, Timani Carriol of The Guardian posted something on Twitter about it. And that has a coaches tab, and it lists, all the coaches basically, and who they've coached or who they're currently coaching, what languages they speak as well, which I think is quite interesting. I don't know how reliable it is, but it's the only time I've ever seen any effort to kind of catalogue that kind of information.
A difficulty with that, and I don't know whether that's that. I know Resultina, but I don't have it. You got to pay for it, and it's not much money. It's not much money, but it's also it doesn't give you much more than the ATP app gives you. And I've always kind of used the ATP app. I know a lot of the players use it, all the lads use it, Resultina, but I don't know whether it only, something with the coaches thing is the ATP has this thing called an ATP coach, which is basically, unless you've been a player, it's impossible to become an ATP accredited coach unless you're about 60. Because if you've not been a player at that level, you've got to have attended, I think it's 100 tournaments before you can apply to be an ATP coach. Now, bear in mind I'm 45 and I've been coaching. I mean, I've been coaching since I was 20 and been coaching at a decent level for I'd say the last 10 years, 10 to 12 years. I'm nowhere near that because it has to be main tour. Like,
Right.
so, to go through that, especially like, and what's strange is how they do it through tournaments, which I find weird. So like the two lads who I coach now are playing and have been for the last 2 years, they're playing Grand Slam level tennis. And I'm working with them on a daily basis, but they can't afford to take me because the doubles money's not great. They can't afford to take me every week. So they can only afford to take me a certain amount of weeks. But I'm still coaching them. I don't really get why the number of tournaments that you go to. What happens if you go to a tournament if you're just there for one day at each one? But I think it's something like if you've been a player within the top 300, you have to attend 10 tournaments. Then you're an ATP coach, which or have only ascended if you've have attended 10 tournaments, including that as a player. So it just doesn't really add up or make any sense. It's a strange. I find it a strange way of actually grading. That you don't need any qualification or anything. It's just if you've been to 100 tournaments as a coach, you're an ATP accredited coach. Or if you've been in the top, I think it's the top 300 or top 200.
So presumably, maybe. I mean, there are probably people who go around scrounging for accreditation at tournaments just so they can tick off the box.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not something that I think about. I mean, I'd have pressed for it more. The benefits of it, you don't get that many benefits, to be honest. It's like, I think it's just to say that you're an ATP accredited coach, but I don't think that...
Stick the badge on the website and stuff.
Yeah, I think it's just stuff like that. I looked into it at the start of this year, because I think Henry and Julian, at the time, they got their accreditations and, the players get some sort of... They get pension and that kind of thing. The coaches don't get anything like that. It's just you get a bit of money knocked off a few things. So.
Right. Well, I hope that's answered your question, Philip. I'm sure I can put you directly in touch with Calvin if you've got an investor and you can set up Betton Consultants. George, what role would you like in that company? You make a good cup of tea, I hear.
I'm not sure. I'd definitely be something in the back room, I think, for Calvin. I was going to say, I mean, you mentioned Becker in the question, and I wanted to flag that I watched a little bit of Rune versus Djokovic, which I thought was a very good match. The bits I watched, I probably watched about a set and a half of it before I went out for dinner on the Friday night, and I heard some of Boris's kind of coaching pearls of wisdom, which I thought I'd share the one I heard, which and it was funny because actually thinking about it, I think people used to say he quite often liked to give advice on the serve more than anything, and that indeed his advice to Holger Rune was get your ball toss a bit higher, which I think is always solid advice. But
I mean,
not necessarily. It breaks.
Not necessarily wrong.
Solid advice if the ball toss is too low, but just going around telling everybody to.
I mean, Alexander Zverev chucks it into space, and he manages to miss enough second serves. So,
I tell you one thing I did find amazing was that Djokovic said last week is, I saw them playing chess, and that's what Boris likes to do because it makes you focus. Then there was a picture doing the rounds, and it was the biggest staged photo I've ever seen. They were both at the chess table, and Rune was there and Becca at the same time was and it was hilarious. And I thought that somebody has definitely said, let's take a picture of you both looking focused playing chess.
Oh dear.
There's a Federer Nadal photo shoot ages ago, wasn't there, where they were both playing chess?
Was that?
Yeah, why not?
Or maybe it was Ronaldo and Messi, actually. Now I think about it.
Maybe.
But it was very staged and ridiculous.
I could say something unkind about Becker having learnt where he's learnt to play chess, but I'm not going to do that.
There's a famous prison movie that's based around making chess pieces.
Shawshank Redemption is literally about chess pieces, isn't it? Yeah. I wouldn't like to speculate. Anyway, let's move on. You mentioned Novak Djokovic, George. He won his 97th title in Paris after being booed a lot of finger to the ear. And I mean, needless to say, it fired him up even more. He absolutely loved it. He beat an in-form Grigor Dimitrov 6-4, 6-3 in the final. He's now 12 short of Jimmy Connors' all-time title record. He's been talking about it, and he says he's not been shy about saying that he wants to go and break that record, and maybe that's why people haven't always loved him as much, because he's too busy telling them that he wants to go out and break these records. Well, let's start with Djokovic. I want to talk about Jimmy Connors a little bit because I don't know very much about him, and I'm sure listeners maybe won't as well. But George, starting with Djokovic, I mean, 97 titles, Paris Masters. It's one of those ones that often throws up an unusual winner because everyone's hanging out their arse. But I guess Djokovic has actually had a bit of time off at the end of the year, so it's maybe relatively fresh.
Yeah, and actually looking back at Djokovic's season now, he's lost 5 times all season. Okay, he's not maybe played the volume of matches he has done before, but 3 of those losses came on the clay, where he's then gone on to win, the French Open. So he won't give too many rat's asses about that. Obviously, lost the Wimbledon final, which denied him the calendar slam ultimately. Although had he won that, would there have been more pressure on the US Open, etc. I think there's one other loss. I can't remember where it was, but anyway. That's just crazy consistency again, isn't it? He may be playing a little bit less, but the guy's won 3 of the 4 slams this season. It's felt like he's taken his foot off the gas in lots of ways, kind of around the tour, but still turns up to the biggest events and just gets it done. It'll be interesting to see how much Alcaraz can push him next season, again in these kind of big events, but the level of consistency he's still showing at 36, the kind of control he has in matches on serve, how good he is on every surface, really. His level just rarely wavers these days. Great mental focus. Yeah, he's pretty good, isn't he? To be honest.
Yes. Short answer, yes. Novak Djokovic, good at tennis. Calvin, this Jimmy Connors record, I feel like when we talk about, the great players of tennis over the years, men's tennis in particular, Connors is like the name you sort of say last. Like you sort of go, your Federers, your Nadals, your Djokovic's, your Samprases, your Agassi's, your Borgs, your Edbergs, your McEnroes. And then people go, oh, and your Connorses. And I do feel like it's the one that kind of, for whatever reason, comes last. I don't know, like you will have a little bit more contemporary experience than me and George, but can you really put your finger on why that is?
I think there's a few reasons. I think one, because he wasn't very well liked. I mean, he was in certain circumstances. I guess he was kind of like, if we're going to go topically, he was kind of like the Donald Trump of tennis, in that he was quite obnoxious. But also, you could say that McEnroe was obnoxious, but on the flip side, McEnroe had this beautiful artistic style that was a complete contradiction of how he was in himself as a person. Whereas Connors was obnoxious, and also the way he played was just ugly. Like, no one would ever say that it was beautiful to watch or anything like that. It was entirely, if you liked Jimmy Connors, you were 100% liking him for his attitude. Like, the way he played was just strange and kind of hit this two-handed slice drive backhand and that kind of thing. And I think as well, it's like, although he was obviously one of the great players, he didn't really have, and for somebody who was dominant, he didn't really have a dominant period where you would say, even though he might have been number 1 in the rankings for that period, that you would definitely say he was definitely the best player in that period, just because of the strange way that it's hard to explain as well, like from the sort of from the 70s into the and into the 80s, how different the tour was, as we saw in that documentary that we watched on Vias, just how the rankings worked, where the tournaments were, and that kind of thing. That a lot of players didn't play a lot of the tournaments. It was only into the sort of late 80s that the players even started going to the Australian Open, even though it was a major, and that kind of thing. So, and I think there was also a feeling that if any of the other if McEnroe or Borg or any of those guys played their best stuff, they'd always beat Connors. And I think that's probably all of those reasons combined of why he's not held in the same regard as the others, despite having an exceptional record.
This is probably a very unfair reflection of his career, because obviously I didn't really watch at the time, but every time I kind of saw any clips of him, it was always the bloke who argued with McEnroe lots of times to the point where it looked like they were going to fight, and the bloke who played like a really long time. Like, he felt like he had a very kind of
he had a run to the quarterfinals of the US Open when he was 40, I think, which back then, I mean, it's like Federer's done it since, and Djokovic is now 36, 37, isn't he? So, or is he 35 still, Djokovic?
No, it's 36, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's kind of like getting there now, but back then it was completely unheard of. Well, not unheard of, because Ken Rosewall played into his 40s, but just highly unlikely. But there's actually a really good documentary about his run in that tournament, which really highlights what he's like as a person as well. It was one of the first 30 for 30s that ESPN did about 10 or 12 years ago. And if anybody can get them, there's a couple of tennis ones. There's one on Martina Navratilova and Chris Evert, and there's the one on Jimmy Connors' run to, I don't remember when it was, like 90 or 91 US Open.
91 US Open, he made the semis, yeah.
Yeah, was it the semis, was it? He lost to Courier, yeah. And it's famously like he beat Aaron Krickstein in that, and Aaron Krickstein was kind of his, like Connors was his mentor, and he'd spent a lot of time with him on his ranch and that kind of thing. And then famously, Connors just ditched him, like never spoke to him again. Bizarrely, and Krickstein's interviewed, and it says he still doesn't, to this day, he doesn't know what happened. But yeah, I think just a lot of it is to do with that kind of thing.
The record itself, George, 12 more titles. I mean, he could probably do it in Grand Slams alone if you do the simple maths based on current gradients. But do you think there's? I mean, in my head, there's an air of inevitability about it, as much as anything else, because he wants to do it. If you hadn't talked about it, I might think, well, he might get to the end of next year and think, actually, now I'm going to go and spend time with my family and do my charity work or whatever. But I think the fact that he's identified it, as you say, he might go out and find a few 500s he's not played for a while.
Yeah, I mean, part of me would back him, but I mean, I sort of half was thinking Federer might do it at one stage, and then really his body did just catch up with him. And that, we are talking about a guy who's 36, as fit and brilliant as he is still. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that something does break down over the next 2 years, and then you're running out of seasons to kind of play with to come back. But I mean, I don't know how many titles he's actually won this season, Djokovic. I guess like 7, maybe. So he, in theory, it's 2 more good seasons. I just think Alcaraz will make inroads in the slams, and then it's a case of how many tournaments will Novak play all year round, and how many will he play without Alcaraz kicking around as well, I think. But yeah, I mean, he's definitely got a good chance of doing it. It's probably, I'd probably say, 3 years feels quite realistic for him, really, isn't it? 4 a year.
So he won 6 this year.
6.
Because he won.
Well, he could win the ATP finals still, couldn't he?
Yes, that's true. He won Adelaide, Australian Open, French Open, Cincinnati, US Open, and Paris. So yeah, he could win tour finals as well. To be honest, maybe should win tour finals, like given form elsewhere. But we can come on to that and maybe talk about it another time. But he's certainly in the best nick of anyone. Hard to argue against that.
I was just thinking there, just quickly, James. Like, is it? I was thinking this earlier on, that is it, apart from maybe a 3 or 4 week period where Alcaraz was excellent, like this is going to go down as a really bad tennis year in the men's game in terms of just the overall level. It's just not been great.
There's a lot of players who I think we think are better than they've shown this year, right?
Yeah.
Like if you look at, say, the top 10, yeah, as you say, barring Alcaraz, I mean, Sinner has finished the year very well, but for large parts of it, we've kind of looked at him and gone, why are you not playing better? Medvedev has had some really big flat patches. Rublev, I don't know, it's hard because I think we have quite low expectations of Andrei Rublev.
Yeah, I think Rublev's had a good year for what he is, but he's never going to go down as an all-time great tennis player.
Yeah. Zverev's been coming back from injury. Tsitsipas has probably underperformed a bit. Rune's probably done kind of what we'd expect of him. And then once you're outside the top 8, I think it's kind of much of a muchness. But
I think when you look back at some of the years that we've had before, this one will go down as a year where like no one's really challenged, apart from the Wimbledon final. In a big match, no one's really challenged Djokovic. Like he's pretty much cruised through all the big matches he's played.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's the thing, isn't it? Like it's the same in boxing. People always say it. You know, for dance, you need a dance partner. Like you need someone to challenge you, and he just hasn't. Like we've had Alcaraz a bit, but in some ways his body's let him down. To be honest.
I think that said, if you think back I know it's not all about the British public or whatever, but if you ask people to name a memorable Wimbledon match over the last 10 years, that one will pop to their mind a lot more than many others we've seen in that period. I think we've lacked a really good final. Like even the Djokovic-Federer one in 2019, which was a very close final, was nowhere near that kind of level.
I've never been to a good Wimbledon final. I think, but Djokovic Alcaraz. Before Djokovic Alcaraz, I had never been to it because I missed 2019 because I lost my job that year. I was at Cilic against Federer.
Was particularly bad. Well, actually, Djokovic Anderson was bad as well.
Yeah, I was also at that one, needless to say. It's hard to remember a really genuinely good one. Djokovic Berrettini, again, not really very good.
We had the semi-final one year, Djokovic Nadal. What was that? 2018. That was up there with one of the best matches I went to. Live. That was.
It was over 2 days though. That wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It's the famous roof argument.
It was a brilliant match.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if this does lead us on to these questions, but I've had an email from Rajesh, and he doesn't like our stance on Djokovic, whatever that is. He seems to think we have some sort of anti-Djokovic stance.
I think we've just been quite nice to him for the last 10 minutes, to be honest.
I've spent the last 3 years saying he's the GOAT, but apparently people hear what they want to hear. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He says he still enjoys it, so I kind of respect him for that. Most people who think we're biased refuse to listen. So anyway, Rajesh has 2 questions. I'm going to combine them together and you can answer them as you wish. He says, do you think Djokovic is being undermined? I don't quite know what he means by undermined, but regardless of his stance on vaccines, which I tend not to agree with him, if he was from the US, he would have been decorated as the greatest athlete and he would have a statue in every other city. I've heard that line before. I can't remember who coined it.
What athlete has a statue in every other city?
Muhammad Ali? Muhammad Ali, maybe?
Doesn't he? Has probably about 2 statues in the whole world. That's it. Michael Jordan's always on the list of when people say best athletes of all time. I don't know. He's probably got one in Chicago. He might have one in Carolina. Yeah, I don't think he's got a statue anywhere else.
How many Tiger Woods statues are there? That's the other question.
Yeah. If you play for Man City, he'd probably have about 10 statues. They love sticking a statue up. We've got guys who've won 1 league title got a statue outside the empty hand.
That's only because Old Trafford's falling down, Calvin. They can't build statues.
We have statues of players who've won lots of stuff, at least.
Anyway, and the second question, or the second half of the question, as I'm going to put it, is the media completely biased when it comes to Djokovic? If Federer is going for 24 or 25th slam, there would not be any debate about him declaring as GOAT. Joker wins a 23rd or 24th slam. The next question he gets is, when are you retiring? I mean, I think the question maybe is a little bit one-eyed, I would suggest. But, people have their favourites. That's more than reasonable. To be honest, I don't think the media is completely biased against Djokovic. I think the media is less set up to, celebrate Djokovic than it was for, say, Federer or, to a lesser extent, Nadal. There are a lot of reasons for that. Djokovic, one of them, I think, is the way the media has changed. In the old days, I would hesitate to say the good old days, but pre-digital media, and even in the very nascent days of digital media, when it was just newspapers and you didn't know who read what in every page of the paper, people just wrote about what was going on. If you're a tennis correspondent, you just wrote the big piece. Roger Federer wins his first Grand Slam, and you just write about Federer. But then when Djokovic came along, he was in a more digitally media-dominated era, especially in the latter half of his career when he's had a great deal of success and inevitably has been breaking records. And we know now exactly what articles people read. We know how long they read them for. We know where they come from. And the reality is, and people might say this is chicken and egg, but the reality is that Djokovic is not as globally popular as Roger Federer. There's facts about the stats to back that up. Maybe that's because he's Serbian and lots of people don't like Serbians and there is prejudice against Serbia. Lots of people don't like the Swiss, but I think it's probably a little bit less passionately. So I've gone on a bit longer than I kind of meant to here, but my point really is, I think there probably is a little bit of built-in bias against Novak Djokovic, but I don't think that the if Federer was going for 25 or 24 argument, I find a bit redundant because it's kind of too much in the realm of the hypothetical. I don't think anyone thinks that Djokovic isn't the GOAT in the media. I actually can give you an example of this. When Djokovic won the Australian Open this year, someone sent around a quote from a prominent pundit saying, I think we might have to start to close the debate on the GOAT. And everyone we all got it sent through the same medium. And everyone sat around me was like, what do you mean think? What do you mean might? Like, obviously that's the end of the debate. Like, obviously he's now the GOAT if he wasn't already. Like, it was like there was no conversation about it. So I think it's very easy for people to say what they think the media does and doesn't do and does and doesn't think. But, like, once you've been inside the sausage factory, you see how it's made, and maybe that changes your opinion. Calvin?
I mean, first of all, I find this GOAT debate just bizarre. I don't know why we need a definitive answer on it all the time, and it's something that's just come in to not just tennis, for all sports in the last sort of 10 or 12 years, this obsession with who is the GOAT. And the one thing I'm absolutely certain on all of these debates is that no one's ever going to agree, because sport is largely, it's a cross between objectivity and subjectivity, and you're never going to get to that point where you can indefinitely prove who the greatest player of all time is. Secondly, on that, I don't think that you judge it entirely just on who wins the most slams anyway, because as I've said before, if you do that, then you have to call Roy Emerson the 5th best tennis player of all time. And I don't think anybody thinks that Roy Emerson is the 5th best tennis player of all time, but he's won the 5th most amount of slams after Federer, Djokovic, Nadal, and Sampras. So, and I remember when Sampras broke his record, and nobody at the time thought that just made Sampras the greatest player of all time because he broke Roy Emerson's record. So I don't think you just go on numbers at all. That's not to say I don't really have an opinion on who the greatest of all time is. Same as I don't have an opinion on who's better in Ronaldo and Messi. I just think they were all brilliant. But anyway.
Unusual fence sitting from you there, Calvin, on Ronaldo and Messi.
It's
they were just both great.
It's not fences. There's just no way of proving it. I don't know why we need the definitive answer. Like, I just don't. I don't really get it at all. The thing with Djokovic and the media, I'll tell you why he's held as some regard. It's just because of his weirdness, and that's all it was. He wasn't seen this way up until about 2016, maybe, when he started. Like, he sacked his coaches and he hired that guru. And he went in that weird period, and then on top of that, and then came all the vaccine stuff and all that kind of stuff. And his wife is not, by all accounts, and this is not my opinion. I've no opinion, but his wife is not the most pleasant person to anybody around the media and that kind of thing, or the other players. And it's like anything. You start to, if you take those positions up in life, I'm not saying anyone is right or wrong here, but then you open yourself up to being more disliked. And Federer and Nadal, they don't do that. Now, I'm not saying that Djokovic shouldn't. I quite like people when there's people have some character and they have opinions about things. But the reason Nadal and Federer, how you would say, more well-liked by the media, although I think all of the media think that Djokovic is brilliant. They just think he's a bit strange. But the reason why Nadal and Federer are not viewed in that way is because they've kind of been quite purposeful in not taking extreme positions on anything.
I think, I mean, I probably agree with both of you. I probably would say that Djokovic gets a harsher level of criticism for his brand of tennis compared to those guys. Like, I think a lot, there's often a focus on, he's just a brick wall, but actually ignoring the physical, remarkable things he does to get into some of those positions to be a brick wall. Like, he's one of the most crazy athletes to watch live in terms of that flexibility of going over his ankles or whatever. And it does, I don't know, like, there was always a bit of kind of Federer, could do no wrong sort of thing. And there have been some pretty bloody cringe moments. I've been in press conferences with Federer where people have just like basically asked a question saying "I love you" sort of thing. I mean, yeah, Federer was a bit of a unique character in terms of making some people become absolutely pathetic wet wipes, which was a crazy characteristic of his as well. Saint Roger or whatever you want can do no wrong, and Federer often said some things, and you're sitting there like, God, he's being a bit of an arrogant arsehole today, isn't he? But no one would ever say it about Saint Roger. So I think there's probably, as with all of this, there is degrees of truth to which, sometimes Federer would get much more favourable reporting than Djokovic, and there's lots of reasons for that. But also, I think you just need to be not that sensitive about a bloke you don't know. Like, you can just be like, yeah, he's really good at tennis. He's really popular in some parts. Don't need to get that upset about what other people kind of think about it.
The vaccine thing was the big one. If Federer and Nadal had taken the same position on the vaccine as Djokovic did, their stock would have plummeted. Would have absolutely plummeted to the same level, and we'd have seen them both as being, or both or either as being, oh, right, okay, that's where we're at. And if Djokovic should have taken the norm position that everyone else has, his stock would be in higher regard. And you can say that that's fair or not fair based on what happened, but that is what it basically comes. That's what about 80% of it comes down to. That 1 year period with the vaccine.
Especially people outside tennis. I think, probably 4 years ago, if people would ask me, what's Novak Djokovic like? What do you think of Novak Djokovic? I don't, he seems a bit boring tennis player, or, whatever. People be like, what do you think of him? And now people know Novak Djokovic. They don't know the whole Novak Djokovic. Like I mentioned his charity work earlier. Actually, look at the numbers his foundation did recently. Like, it's ridiculous. But what people know about him is the vaccine stuff, because that's the controversial stuff. That's the stuff that really got them wound up.